Hey, it's Monday the 25th of April, last week of the month. I've just recorded a video covering some Forex markets, which I hope will help you, the analysis of that and a couple of trade ideas. I'm moving on to now some commodities and stock markets. Silver is actually just touching a pretty important support level from the moving averages and from this trend line going back to July last year, 2021. So it's just above the 50% fib. A break below the 50% fib would certainly mean that support level has been broken, but it looks like we are testing that around the 2380, 2370 area. So let's see if we get a bounce off there. Silver is in basically, I have got this trend line indicating that we were in a triangle, we've broken above it, we're retesting the upper trend line of the triangle, but ultimately, when you scrunch this chart up and have a look at something a little bit more longer term, you can see that this is yet another market that is trading in a very much a longer term sideways trend. Like many of the Forex markets. Now I've put a trend line, an upper trend line here, just to emphasize the fact that the silver is in a sideways trend. The trend lines aren't even really converging. You can see this is a very, it's not a steep trend line at all. So it's going to be a long time before those trend lines converge. In the meantime, we're trading from a range up around 2650 down to 2150, call it, and we're in the middle of that range at the moment. So maybe we'll bounce from the middle of the range with that slightly shorter term trend line going back to July and some moving averages. We'll see. For me, that's the only support level of any significance in silver. If that does break, then we could be headed towards $23, $22.50. Who knows? Maybe even down to $21.50 to test that lower trend line. Okay, gold, usually one of my favorites, struggling a little bit with it lately. This is the weekly chart, big double top, indicates to me that gold is probably going to go significantly south, but for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, it's just gone sideways. Up 1 week, down the next, really, which is no help to me at all. We have got a bearish engulfing candle on the weekly chart there, so that probably indicates that gold has topped. I don't know what we were doing rallying back up like that. Not, I guess those inflation hedgers still think that gold is an inflation hedge and they're probably still buying it when they see it weak. I don't agree with them. I don't think gold's an inflation hedge at all. As you well know, if you've been following me for the last year or so, it just hasn't reacted to 40-year records in inflation around the world, certainly in the US and some parts of Europe. So it hasn't paid off for those gold bulls. And now we have potentially a very large double top pattern, which could send gold significantly lower. So we have now started to move to the downside, reacting to that double top. I don't know why we went as far as 2000. That, to me, I can't see a level there. I couldn't have suggested a short, even though I thought gold would eventually turn around and go down. It just wasn't a reliable resistance level for me. Anyway, that's where the market turned around. I guess it's a psychological level, 2000, big number. We're now heading towards 1900, a little bit of support around 1900, but I wouldn't be a buyer there particularly. I just don't think it's a strong support level, and I do have a negative bias for gold. Break below sort of 1895 should be the next sell signal. Silver, I've already covered. I'm just going to check that again. Yeah, we do seem to be holding that low that I suggested we might do, 2370. We're bouncing back a little bit. We'll see. Crude is also a market that's moving sideways. So lots of sideways action. As you see, we've got a triangle pattern here, almost two triangle patterns here with these downward sloping upper trend lines. We'll see where that ends up, but for now it's very clear that oil is consolidating. It's obviously been a wild ride. We're hovering around the $100 area. For that reason, I haven't been able to identify any particularly hot trades in oil. I'm just going to wait and see how that pattern plays out, because in the short term there's nothing really for me to get my teeth into. Stock markets. Well, the Germany 40 actually held up quite well compared to the US stock markets. I do have a negative bias on this, and I'm quite surprised at how well it is holding up. There is no pattern, no clear trend for me to give you. I could argue that that's a double top up there, but that's pretty much all played out anyway, more than hitting its target. So there isn't any, sort of head and shoulders pattern or anything else, but we do clearly seem to be in a bear trend. We're lower again today. We actually overran my first resistance level on last week. Again, that early move up or the move up early in the week last week completely fooled me. I didn't understand what stock markets were doing up there, and actually I've been short for quite a while and I had to get out, and I didn't manage to get back into a short position. So that was particularly frustrating to see the market then move in the direction in which I had expected, but that's trading. I now have no position, and I'm going to have to wait and hope the market bounces. This is the Nasdaq. Could even argue that this is one big head and shoulders pattern. I could argue that we've already had one head and shoulders pattern, and I could argue that this is a neckline to a head and shoulders pattern. I could say that the neckline is here to, come on, here. I could argue that this is a small left shoulder, this is a whole big head with head and shoulders patterns within the head, and this is another relatively small right shoulder, and a break below 13,000 would be a sell signal. But whatever I say, the Nasdaq is clearly developing a bear trend. We've got moving average crossovers, which are quite negative for the Nasdaq. The momentum is most definitely to the downside. Let's have a look at the Dow Jones. Dow Jones has held up better than the other two stock markets, the S&P and the Nasdaq, but even that is now succumbing to selling pressure, and no clear pattern really there. I guess I could argue that we have something of a broadening top. Could I argue that? Whoops, let me just scale that. Where are we now? That's what I'm looking for. A broadening top pattern potentially in the US 30, the Dow Jones. So although, again, I've talked about sideways patterns all morning, that's a very clear sideways pattern. We've been going sideways now since at least May of last year. In fact, I can argue since the 16th of April last year. In fact, we're not trading far from where we were around April last year. So really, we've gone up a bit, we've gone down a bit over the past year, but we're pretty much where we were a year ago for the Dow Jones, for the US 30. But potentially, I could argue that is a broadening top pattern. So on the grand scale of things, looking weeks and months into the future, if we break the downside, then we have a quite important sell signal. 32,000 it would have to break, and that would be a very important longer term sell signal, and could indicate a crash. Let's face it, that's probably what we're looking at if that were to happen, but we could be days, weeks and months away from that. The S&P does have quite an interesting negative pattern. I've talked about this already, so you're probably well aware, but we do have a potential head and shoulders pattern. I can argue a bit clearer perhaps than that Nasdaq pattern. Let's see, I could argue that that's probably the neckline with a neckline around 4,000, or is it 4,100? Yeah, 4,100 I could say. That looks a bit clearer as a head and shoulders pattern, but whatever way, again, probably developing into a negative pattern. This little push up fooled me the beginning of last week, then we collapsed, which is what I thought would happen at the beginning of the week. So although I got the direction right, my timing was wrong, and unfortunately that little move up got me out of my short position, and I'm very frustrated to then see the market sell off into the end of the week. And by Thursday, I was so confused with what was going on, and especially being post Easter, with, as I said last week, not all the big boys in there trading. I decided to just leave it alone, and I didn't get involved. So I've missed that move to the downside. I'm going to wait for something else to develop. I'm not just going to jump into a short position now. I've got to wait. Trading most of the time is about waiting. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. Join me again tomorrow when I'll try and make some more sense of this and hopefully get some decent trade signals going.